Hi guys, and welcome back to Is It Worth It Reviews. Today we are going to talk about very affordable and interesting small preamplifier Fosi P3, and it comes at only $79.99 US. Now, when it comes to features of this preamp, there is not really much to talk. In the back here, you can see that we have a set of RCA inputs, then a set of RCA outputs, one 3.5mm auxiliary output, but there is also a Bluetooth receiver on board. Here you attach the Bluetooth antenna. And this means you can connect it directly to your phone or laptop. The sound fidelity is not as good as connecting it through the RCA inputs using like a proper CD player or DAC as a source. But for convenience, it's there and you know, it cannot hurt. Now in the front, you can see three volume knobs. The middle one, the biggest one, is for volume, of course. Left and right ones are tone controls, bass and treble, and they have convenient middle click where tone controls are in neutral, and you can decrease them, increase them, alter the tonality a little bit, and that can also be quite useful in many systems, let's be honest here. Fully on the right you can see one mechanical switch with three positions, off, Bluetooth and RCA input, and there is also a headphone output here too. And this one is not really all that powerful. It's in line with like portable DAC dongles nowadays, and it has the same tonal qualities and same fidelity as the preamp RCA output, so I will not be dedicating any special part of this video to the headphone output. You can just copy-paste everything that I say about its tonality in general to that output too, and have in mind that is not very powerful, so it's more in line, as I said, with these portable DAC dongles, meaning don't expect this to drive some heavy demanding loads. Oh yeah, and the most important thing for a tube preamp is that it uses two tubes. I'll put the exact model on the screen because I cannot remember right now. And by default you do get two factory supplied tubes, which made one con for me for this preamp. Out of the box, some pins were a little bit, just a little bit bent and twisted. You do not notice it that much with your naked eye, but it was almost impossible to fit them inside of the tube sockets. Especially because I was trying to do it like this, and I didn't know at that time that you can actually unscrew these copper rings that looks nice, but are narrowing the hole that you can operate in, and you cannot see anything just by looking at it. But once this is unscrewed, it's much easier to see what you are doing and to align pins, insert the tube, and then after that you screw on this copper ring. I of course didn't know at first that I can do this because I didn't read the manual, and in manual they clearly state that it's advised to remove them before inserting tubes. But if you watch my channel regularly, you probably know that I often say real men don't read manuals. Well, maybe, just maybe, I'm a little bit wrong on that. But I'm still not ready to commit to any changes on that topic. One more thing to mention is that I've only tested P3 with its default factory supplied tubes. I didn't purchase any aftermarket tubes, and I cannot give any recommendations on that. That may be material for a separate video, but I have not decided to do it yet. For now, let's see how it sounds out of the box in a factory default state. And I did most of my testings of P3 using it with Fosi's own V3 amplifier. Now, many call this power amplifier, but technically it's not. It's basically a very small, very simple integrated amplifier, because it does have volume attenuation on board. But if you crank that volume up to the max, this volume potentiometer will basically turn into a short circuit. And in that case, you can consider it to be a power amp. it will just apply gain and amplification to the signal, and the volume control will be controlled from the external preamp, in this case P3. And that also gave me interesting opportunity to compare how this internal volume control of V3 compares to using an external device to do it. And should you even consider getting P3 if you already have what it's needed for a device to function inside of the V3 itself? And to answer that, I'll start with what P3 preamp brings to the sound. And it's just as you would expect when you hear that you are adding a small tube preamp into the signal path, into your hi-fi setup chain. The sound becomes a bit fuller and bolder, but edges and tiny details become a little bit softer, more mellow. That makes for a slight give and take situation. For example, if I would play something like this, using P3 in the chain, I would notice the instrument, that double bass, would sound bigger and like more present, more palpable in my room, and it feels a bit weightier. But when I remove P3 and I use only V3, the sound directly from the deck to V3 and then my speakers, the sound is a bit more precise. That bass line is touch more controlled. It is a bit leaner, but it's also more focused in the middle of the sound stage. But the whole sound stage itself is also, in total, a little bit narrower and kinda more cramped. You could say that going directly to V3 would give you a bit more precision and focus and tone edges, crispiness in the tech, whereas using P3 as a preamp would give you bigger, slightly wider and lusher soundstage with weightier tones and a little bit more palpable, but at the expense of those crispy, well-focused edges becoming slightly softer and mellowed out. And that attack and speed and quick transients, all of that is also slightly softened, and it appears to be slightly slower. And in my opinion, it's difficult to say if there is a clear choice, clear path ahead here. If you want something that resembles more to the monitor-like sound, you would probably appreciate going with V3 solo. But on the other hand, if you have a setup that has plenty of details, detail retrieval, and especially that high frequency detailing, clear, crisp edges, but you are lacking a little bit of fullness or just softness or musicality, and you find yourself dreaming about that analog-like sound, whatever that is, you actually might really appreciate what P3 brings to the mix. So it will be very system dependent and your taste dependent. So for example, let's say one realistic scenario is that you're using very entry-level deck. It's maybe also a few years old, something like topping E30 or topping D50, D50S, shit Modi 3, the original one, not Plus version that I personally did not test. All those decks have pretty great detail retrieval, but they do tend to sound lean and they lack a little bit of warmth and tone timbre and body. And if you connect those decks to some modern small Class D amplifier that's pretty resolving and accurate sounding, like Fosi's own V3 or any of the SMSLs like A300, AO200 MK2, topping PA5 or PA7, etc., chances are that with that budget older deck and these amps, the sound will be on the leaner, analytical and slightly edgy side of things. And it might impress you at first, but it might be not so pleasant for a longer listen. In those cases, inserting P3 can be a true lifesaver. It would add a bit of tone timbre, at least perceived tone timbre, because everything would sound a bit bigger, bolder, weightier, and also at the same time softer, warmer, just more pleasant to your ears. And in that case, P3 is mellowing down the sound of your system while not losing much of detail retrieval capability. On the other hand, the better and more complete, more wholesome your source sounds, for example, if you're using more upstream option like Geshelli Labs DAC, or I tested it also with topping D93 Sabre DAC, just for testing. It's not a realistic scenario where you would use almost $1,000 DAC connected to a 79 preamp and then like 99 amp. It's not a realistic scenario. But I just wanted to make a point that in that case, I actually found out that connecting topping D90 directly to V3 sounded the best. And using topping's own internal volume control was even the better option than using volume control on the integrated amp V3. You just max that volume control, use V3 as a power amp, then use this topping as both a DAC and a preamp, and you'll retain greatest detail retrieval, greatest dynamics, snappiness, and just soundstage width and airiness and sensation of space. Adding P3 in this scenario doesn't add much to the sound. In fact, it takes more than it adds. It does still make it a bit fuller and softer, but it muddies fine details quite a bit. It limits dynamics, it limits speed, and it definitely limits the high frequency extension and the sensation of air. But all of that is much less observable, even barely observable when you're using some entry-level DAC such as SMSL SU1 that has pretty decent detail retrieval, but it doesn't have huge airy soundstage to boot with. In fact, it sounds quite a bit narrow compared to these higher tier sources. And in that case, addition of P3 brings more than it takes. It brings fuller, healthier tonality, juicier, weightier tones, and even slightly bigger soundstage. Is that done by simply pleasantly coloring the sound? Probably, but who cares? It resembles more to what you hear when you listen to guitars and double basses and real acoustic instruments in real life. Their scale, their tone timbre, all of that will sound slightly more realistic with P3, while you sacrifice a tiny bit of dynamics and snappiness and quick transients that I think you will still have plenty in a system like SMSL SU1, this V3 amp, or for example ZA3 that I'm going to review soon, or any SMSL amp. But my point is that that kind of system, small class D amp and small but good sounding DAC, they will have plenty of detail retrieval. They will be very resolving, but they will lack a little bit of what P3 can give. It's a good give and take deal, because P3 takes something that that kind of system already has in abundance. It mellows those details and snappiness just a little bit, but it gives something that that system doesn't have on its own, like fullness and juiciness and tone timbre and slightly bigger, lusher soundstage. Now, Fosi P3 is not some sort of holy grail for good, great sound and huge sound staging on a budget. it is not shit Freya. It is not a giant killer preamp. If you have a much higher tier system and you want to add some tone coloring, some nice tone timbre, and you want to use this one, it will come with some sacrifices, because it will not be transparent enough to preserve a detail retrieval of your $500-700 deck and feed it to your $500-700 power amp. But I think it's not meant to do that. Instead, it will be pretty great with taking sound from like comparably priced around $100 deck, like I mentioned SMSL SU1 or something similar, and connecting that to equally appropriately priced amplifier like V3 or something similar. And in that case, this preamp makes sense. And with that, I think it's time to wrap up this review. It's a small, very affordable preamp that brings a little bit of spice and warmth to your setup, but don't expect it to be some sort of giant killer and to compete in terms of transparency and dynamics and sound stage with big and expensive tube preamps such as shit Freya or something like that. That's just unrealistic. But on its own, and for what it is and its price, P3 is an interesting device. And that would be all for today, guys. See you next time. Bye.